Today we're going to talk about cost of living again, but from a little different perspective. If you are curious about what it costs to live in the Tampa, Florida area, stick around. I'm Sam and welcome to the Living in Tampa, Florida channel, where every single week we release videos about what it's like to live, work, play, and move to the Tampa, Florida area. If that's something you're interested in, make sure you subscribe, hit the little bell so you don't miss any of our new videos. I am a licensed realtor in the state of Florida, so if you have any real estate specific questions anytime, please reach out to me. My number and email are right there on the screen. Call, text, email is all fine. Also, I have a link down in the description that goes straight to my calendar. So if you want to just schedule a Zoom call, schedule a phone call that way, that is super easy as well. All right, let's get into some cost of living information. I got an email a few weeks ago from a man in Ireland. And he was telling me, hey, we're working on getting our visas. Me, my wife, and my 3 kids are wanting to move to the Tampa area. We have these couple areas in mind around Tampa. This is what we do for work. Can you please help me? He said, can you please help me make sense of how much money I need to make? Everything online doesn't actually make sense. People use all these scales and people just compare it to other cities. I need your help. Please give me your best guess of what it will cost me to live in Tampa. This was a really interesting email, and I don't normally like to give out this kind of information, because it's kind of tricky to tell someone what they would need to spend, because everyone's spending is very different. Everyone's expectations and desires are also very different. And he even mentioned in there that he realizes that I can't solve his problems and I can't have the perfect answer, but he's just very curious to have real numbers and real expectations. So I wrote him back a long email with some details, and we're going to get into like how I thought through some of those details here, because I want you to be able to answer that same question. Not just how much does it cost to live in Tampa compared to other places. You know, you might say, oh, Tampa's cheaper than New York City. Yeah, like everybody knows that. But what does that actually mean for you and for your income and for your expenses on a month-to-month basis? Here it is. So when this guy emailed me, he told me he's married, he has 3 kids, he wants to own a home, and he wants to have kind of a middle-class American life. This is very interesting, you know, kind of what is that? What is middle class anyway? And we all kind of have our different ideas of what that looks like and means. And so what I took from that is, oh, he wants to own a house that's in a good neighborhood, near some good schools, that's accessible to the airport, accessible to some outdoor activities, and accessible to some good like downtown kind of areas. And like I've said, around Tampa there's tons of little downtown areas in all of these sub-cities. It's not just the big Tampa downtown area when I say that. So the number I came to for this man was $65,000. And some of you may just pause the video right there and close it because you're like, that's way too high. And I realize it's kind of high. And the reason I made it higher, I even added another 20% on top of it. And I told him this, but I would rather him be prepared. I don't want him to move here and realize, oh my gosh, this guy was wrong. I need to make way more money than he told me. I would rather him be surprised and think, oh, I can get by with a little less. And that's the kind of surprise we all want when it comes to our income and expenses. So let's run through some of my numbers. And before I started filming this, I asked my wife, can I tell the world, no, just you guys, not the whole world, can I tell these people what we spend every single month on all of these little details? And she said, Of course, I think that will be valuable information for anybody trying to make this kind of decision. And so here it is. For housing, always the biggest expense for most people. We pay $1,600 a month. And at the very end of this video, I will break down how we got to that $1,600 per month when we purchased our house, so you can kind of see what those numbers look like as well. So $1,600 a month includes our mortgage, which is principal and interest, taxes, and insurance. That includes flood insurance as well. So $1,600 a month, and we live in a 1,800 square foot house with no garage, and it's an old house, and it's in a flood zone. So we had to make some compromises to get that size for that price, but we're okay with that. It fits our needs really well. Okay, right along with housing expenses, utilities, and I'm kind of separating internet from this. Utilities, we spend about $300 per month, a little bit more than that in the heat of the summer, in the hottest months of the summer, which are really kind of May to August. Those are when our electric bill is the highest from running the air conditioner quite a bit more. And then our internet is $50 a month, which is pretty normal for around here, $50 to $70 a month for internet. And we don't have any kind of cable or anything like that, partially because we have a toddler, so we're busy enough. We don't really have time to watch TV. But also there is so much stuff through streaming services and things like that. And you'll see subscriptions here at the end. So it's not like I don't have those, Netflix and Amazon, stuff like that. Actually, I use somebody else's Netflix. Who am I kidding? All right, our second biggest expense is food. And we try to eat really healthy. We eat a lot of organic food, a lot of very natural food. And we spend about $500 a month on food. Some months maybe a little more if we're hosting more, or if we're making some kind of special recipe. We get a lot of that food delivered from Whole Foods, and we find that Whole Foods is actually cheaper than Publix, which is the biggest kind of southeast grocery chain. People down here really love Publix. They have some unique things at Publix, like their deli and things like that. But the staples we find are more expensive at Publix than even at Whole Foods. And if you have an Amazon Prime membership, you can usually get Whole Foods delivery for free if you order over like $35 at a time. So that's really nice for us. Having a toddler, it's not always that fun to go to the grocery store. So if we can avoid that and it just shows up at our door, we really enjoy that. So about $500 a month for groceries. All right, vehicle expenses. And you might have a higher car payment, or you might have all kinds of situations there. Reality is, if you live in Tampa, you need a car. You're going to have some kind of car expense, whether you're saving for another car or you're fixing your older car, like I have to do with one of my cars, or you're making a car payment. You're always having some kind of car expense, and ours is about $200 every month. Next would be our car insurance, which is also about $200 every month. And when we moved from Colorado, that went up a little bit because it's just more expensive in Florida. And commenters like to say it's because Floridians are such bad drivers. Reality is that's probably true, because the insurance rates are based on claim history. So if there's more accidents in your area, your insurance is going to be more expensive because you're more likely to have a claim. My dad is an insurance agent, so I always feel like I understand insurance probably more than I actually do, but I feel very comfortable talking about it and even thinking through that kind of thing. All right, gas for our cars. My wife doesn't drive a whole lot because the little town we live in, everything's pretty accessible. I drive all over the place, like all over all 3 counties to meet with clients. And we spend about $150 every month on gas. And gas prices are going up right now, so that line item might increase here over the next few months. All right, cell phones. We all have cell phones. We all have smartphones mostly. And those seem to get more and more expensive as the years go by. We have some kind of plan where we pay for the phone monthly, and on top of that, service and data and all that kind of stuff. And combined for both of us, it's about $200 a month. All right, subscriptions. As I said before, I use somebody else's Netflix. We have Amazon subscription that we actually share with somebody else in our family. So it's my subscription, but I added him like as a family member, so we kind of share that. And a couple other miscellaneous subscriptions. Peacock, so we can watch The Office and Parks and Rec, and overall subscriptions come in at about $60 a month for us. So that puts our total expenses every month at $3,260. That means just to cover our bills, we need to make $40,000 a year. Now, keep in mind, I didn't include like shopping, like clothes or household items or things like that. Like there is more involved in our budget, but it's just not as clean cut and it's not as consistent. So, say it's $40,000 a year, I would actually just add 20% onto that. Let's just call it $50,000 per year. That's 25%. So $50,000 per year. That is what I need to make to pay my bills. So now looking back at what I told this gentleman from Ireland, I told him $65,000. He has 2 more kids than me, and I just assume that when he moves here, he's gonna need to buy a vehicle for himself and for his wife. So that's how I came to that $65,000 number. I didn't include any kind of savings. I'm not thinking about that when I'm recommending these kind of numbers. So always think of adding that on top. If you're saving just to have savings or saving for retirement, that's always on top of these numbers that I'm talking about. So some assumptions that I'm making here, I'm making some assumptions about debt. I'm making the assumption that, there's very little car debt, there's little to no student debt, and there's no consumer debt, which is just like credit cards and things like that. Of course, this is an ideal scenario. A lot of us have debt and we've used that debt to get an education or to get ourselves out of a tight spot or even to help someone else in our family. I wouldn't necessarily say that's a bad thing, but it does affect the situation. And if you need to consider that kind of expense, that fixed expense in your budget of making some kind of debt payment, make sure you're calculating that in these numbers as well. The final assumption I'm making is that there is money available for a down payment. And that's kind of how we're going to transition here into how my housing expense is $1,600. So we did have some money from selling another house, some equity that had built up, and we used that money to buy our house here in the Tampa area. The house that we purchased was about $300,000, and we put down a 20% down payment, which is right around $60,000. These numbers were actually a little bit less. It was a little bit less than $300,000, and we put down $60,000 still. And our loan at the end of the day was about $233,000 for our home that we paid $292,000 for. But as I mentioned earlier, we had to make some compromises with this home. It's a nice older home that had been renovated, so it's very nice inside. Nothing needs to be done. Everything's updated, has new air conditioning, new electrical, new appliances, things like that. But it doesn't have a garage or any kind of outside storage or much closet space inside. So that was, a compromise we had to make, and we've had to be creative in how we solve that problem. On top of this, it had a very old roof, and the roof is almost flat. It's just like barely sloped. And so you can't put normal shingles on it, and this type of flat roofing is only rated for 20 years, but then to get insurance on it, most companies won't insure it unless it's been replaced within the past 5 years. So this was kind of tricky and kind of hard to find an insurance company. Thankfully, I was able to find one, and they still want me to replace the roof. Actually, during the negotiation process to buy the house, and I was representing myself as a realtor in this transaction, we negotiated for the seller to contribute some to our closing costs in lieu of the roof needing to be replaced. So they contributed $4,500, which is a little less than half the price of a new roof for this house. And that actually made our down payment and closing costs a little bit lower. And we'll get to that final number at the end of this as well. Another thing related to the roof that kind of surprised me, we got the insurance and they told us we needed to replace the roof. Well, we didn't do it. We spent that money on something else, as you do. And well, we didn't really spend it. We just didn't have to come up with as much down payment. So they reached out and said, hey, we're going to cancel your policy. And I called them and said, why are you canceling my policy? My premium's paid. And they said, oh, you owe us another $400. I said, well, what's that for? And they're like, oh, you never sent this updated inspection that you replaced the roof. And I just told them, I didn't replace the roof. Like, can I just pay the difference and then keep the policy? And they were okay with that. So that's just a reminder to always ask those questions. And whether it's insurance companies or businesses, in the process of buying a house and owning a house, make sure you ask if there's another solution to any kind of problem like that. Okay, let me hit on some of the things that surprised me when we bought our house. First of all, homeowners insurance down here is really expensive. It's like in the top 5 in the US. Just our hazard insurance for our house is around $2,000 every year. And on top of that, we have flood insurance because we are in a flood zone and our house is really low. So you could be in a flood zone and your house could be really high, like on stilts, and then you might not have to have flood insurance, or it might be really low. But since our entire house is very low, we have to have flood insurance. This is insurance issued by FEMA. It's like, coastline kind of insurance. It's just what they make you buy. And ours is $2,000 a year. So that's double our hazard insurance. So instead of paying $2,000 for insurance, we have $4,000 for insurance every single year. And that is factored into our mortgage payment. So it's just spaced out across the whole year. Property taxes is another thing that surprised me. And I know Florida isn't high in terms of the whole country, but it is higher than what we were used to in Colorado. In Colorado, it's about 0.5%. In Florida, it's a little over 1%. But it's pretty much 1%. And there's some ways to reduce that with homestead exemption. So if you live in your house, if it's your primary residence, you can claim it as your homestead. What that means is it reduces the taxable value by about $50,000. So instead of being taxed on a $300,000 house, we would be taxed on a $250,000 house. But the biggest benefit of the homestead exemption is that next year, say the value of our house goes up by $100,000. They can only increase our taxes by 3%. So if you stay in your house, that is your homestead, they can only increase those taxes by 3% each year. And what is really cool about this is if you move to a different house and you move your homestead exemption, there's ways to carry that with you. So, it might not just stay the same price, but you can carry that discount with you and apply that in the new property in a unique way. And when you go through that process, it'll make a little more sense, but you can move that homestead exemption. And usually if you sell a property, you have, a year or so to move that homestead exemption. But if you're moving here and you're buying a house, keep in mind that, like, I bought my house in September, so those 2020 taxes were not discounted in any way. I couldn't claim homestead exemption for that year because it had already started. I went ahead and claimed homestead exemption for 2021, and it had to be done by the end of March. And you just go online and fill out an application. You pretty much just prove that you live in the house all the time, and then they grant that homestead exemption for you. All right, closing costs. This is always a surprise when you buy a house. Closing costs are usually right around 3% of the purchase price. And closing costs include a lot of fees that go straight to the title company, some fees that go to your lender, and some other fees that they call prepaids. And this is really just your insurance and taxes. And you have to pay some of that in advance to kind of just get the policy started or to get the process started. And that actually shocked me. I had to pay a full year of flood insurance up front. So that was an additional $2,000. I thought I'd be paying a few $100s, a month of it, or maybe 3 months of it to get it started. I had to pay for a full year of flood insurance before I could actually close on the house. So they had to have a receipt and everything before they would actually give me the deed saying I own the house. Well, saying that I own some of the house and the bank owns a lot of it. It's not like I actually own it. Who am I kidding? So all of those numbers, kind of left us putting a down payment of about $68,000. Down payment, closing costs, and prepaids ended up being $68,000. And keep in mind that the sellers of our house did contribute $4,500. So that would have been quite a bit higher. What is that? 74,000 if they wouldn't have contributed that. So that's kind of how we got our housing price to about $1,600 every month. And this is one of the major benefits that we don't talk about when it comes to home buying. And I've said before, don't buy a house if you're not ready, and don't buy a house if you don't really want to. Don't just buy it because it's a good investment. It's a unique thing. Like, buy it if you want to. But one of the biggest benefits of owning a house is your housing expense really stays about the same. You know, your taxes and insurance could go up year to year, and they likely will. But if you're renting, your rent might go up 10% every single year. It might go up hundreds of dollars. Actually, we lived in an apartment in Colorado Springs years ago, and when we first got married, we moved in, our rent was $760 for a 2-bedroom apartment. By the time we moved out, 2.5 years later, the rent for that apartment was $1,300. So rent goes up fast, especially in the Tampa area, especially in the St. Petersburg area. Rents have been increasing very drastically. That might be one of the benefits of buying a house, is actually being to stabilize that housing expense and set your expectations so you really have an idea year upon year of what you need to make to cover your expenses. Hey, I hope this information was super useful to you. I'm trying to make it even more simple because reality is when you go online and search for this kind of stuff, it is really confusing. If you did find this useful, please hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe and hit that little bell so you don't miss any videos. Again, please reach out to me anytime. Phone number and email are right there on the screen. I really enjoy connecting with people and helping them understand this area because it's a big area, it can be complicated, but when we talk about your specific needs, desires, and wants, we can find an area that will suit you really well. See you soon.